To other news we are tracking, Ukraine launched one of its biggest drone attacks overnight.
You may know Ukraine from the loudest moments, from breaking news, from maps on a screen, from images that arrive quickly, stay painfully, and leave many people thinking they have understood the whole story. But no country can be understood only through its hardest chapter. Long before the world spoke its name in crisis, Ukraine was already here. Wide, ancient, and quietly unforgettable, a land larger than most people imagine. A land of black earth so fertile that empires once looked at its soil as if it were treasure. A land where rivers carried traders, songs, languages, and faith across the heart of Eastern Europe. A land where golden domes rise above old hills, where wooden homes still stand beside gardens, where grandmothers remember recipes that were never written down, and where villages seem to hold time in their hands. At first, Ukraine may look like a place shaped by history, but the longer you look, the more you begin to realize something deeper. History did not only happen here, it stayed here. It stayed in the dark soil beneath the wheat fields. It stayed in the slow bend of the Dnipro River. It stayed in the silence of ancient monasteries, in the color of embroidered shirts, in the steam rising from a kitchen pot, in the morning light falling over a village market. This is not just a journey across a country. It is a journey into a memory. So the real question is not what the world has seen on the surface. The real question is this: when the headlines fade, when the noise becomes quiet, and when the cameras turn away, what kind of place remains? This is Ukraine, the land that still remembers. To see Ukraine clearly, you cannot look at only one corner of it, because this is not a country that fits easily into a single image. In the west, the Carpathian Mountains rise in long blue layers. There, forests wrapped in mist, their wooden villages resting quietly beneath the slopes. In the center, endless fields open beneath the sky, wheat moving like water, sunflowers turning their faces toward the light, black earth holding the memory of every season that came before. Farther north, rivers and wetlands spread through quiet forests, where morning fog hangs low and the world seems to move at the pace of breath. To the south, the land stretches toward the Black Sea, where port cities carry the smell of salt, coffee, stone streets, and old stories told with a smile. And between these landscapes stand the cities: Kyiv, rising above the Dnipro with golden domes and deep underground stations; Lviv, with cobblestone streets, hidden courtyards, and the scent of roasted coffee after rain; Odesa, facing the sea with a kind of humor that feels almost impossible to translate, but impossible not to notice. At first, these places may seem separate: mountains, fields, rivers, markets, churches, old streets, quiet villages. But slowly they begin to connect. You start to see that Ukraine is not only wide in distance, it is wide in feeling. It can be grand and humble, ancient and young, soft and unbreakable, quiet but never empty. And perhaps that is why the journey has to begin not with a monument, not with a city, and not even with a road. It begins with the earth itself. To understand Ukraine, you have to begin beneath your feet, not with the skyline, not with the borders, not with the names of cities printed on a map, but with the soil. Across much of this country lies the famous black earth, chernozem, a soil so dark, so deep, and so fertile that it has shaped the destiny of this land for centuries. At first, it may seem like a simple agricultural fact. Good soil, good harvests, fields of wheat, sunflowers in summer. But in Ukraine, the earth is not only something people farm, it is something people belong to. This soil has fed families, villages, armies, cities, and countries far beyond Ukraine's borders. It has turned open plains into oceans of gold. It has made the rhythm of planting and harvest feel almost like a second calendar, older than politics, older than modern borders, older than the noise of the present. In summer, the fields can look endless. Wheat bends under the wind like a golden sea. Sunflowers stand in bright rows, thousands of yellow faces following the sun. Small roads cut through the countryside, passing gardens, orchards, wells, and whitewashed houses with painted shutters. From above, it may look peaceful. But peace is not the same as emptiness. Every field here carries labor. Every village carries memory. Every harvest carries the invisible work of hands that came before. This is why the land matters so much. Because for many Ukrainians, the earth is not a background to life. It is the beginning of life. It decides what people eat. It shapes what they celebrate. It gives the kitchen its ingredients, the market its colors, the village its seasons, and the family its stories. And once you understand that, Ukraine no longer looks like a country made only of places. It begins to look like a country made of roots, deep roots, black roots, roots that have learned, again and again, how to survive beneath the surface. If the Black Earth is where Ukraine's memory begins, then the Dnipro is Oskis, where that memory starts to move. It runs through the country like a long blue spine. From the forests of the north, it travels southward across plains, cities, islands, and open fields, carrying water toward the Black Sea. But the Dnipro has never been only a river. For centuries, it was a road, long before highways, railways, and airports connected people across Europe. This river carried traders, warriors, monks, merchants, fishermen, and travelers through the heart of the land. The Greeks knew these waters. The Vikings knew them too. Boats moved south with furs, honey, wax, amber, and stories from the cold northern forests. They returned with silk, silver, faith, and ideas from distant cities, near the edge of another world. A river does not need to speak to change history. It only needs to keep flowing, and the Dnipro kept flowing. It carried goods, but also languages. It carried people, but also beliefs. It carried the quiet beginnings of towns that would become cities, and cities that would become centers of power, faith, and memory. Along its banks, villages learned to live with the seasons. In spring, the water rose. In summer, fishermen worked under wide skies. In autumn, mist gathered over the surface. In winter, the river turned cold and silent, as if storing its stories beneath the ice. There is something deeply Ukrainian in this rhythm. Movement and stillness, hardship and beauty, distance and belonging. Because a river connects places, but it also separates them. It gives life, but it demands patience. It invites travel, but it teaches people to wait. For the thaw, for the crossing, for the right wind, for the return of someone who left. And somewhere along one of its great bends, above green hills and deep water, a city began to rise. A city that would become one of the oldest hearts of Eastern Europe. A city of golden domes, underground caves, crowded streets, ancient prayers, and modern life moving in layers above and below the earth. To understand Ukraine, you follow the river. And sooner or later, the river brings you to Kyiv. Kyiv does not reveal itself all at once. At first, you see the hills, green, wide and rising above the Dnipro, as if the land itself wanted to lift the city closer to the sky. Then you see the domes, gold catching the morning light, white walls standing quietly between trees, church bells moving through the air like something older than language. Kyiv is one of those cities where time does not sit in a museum. It walks beside you. It is there in the stone steps, in the old monastery walls, in the wide boulevards, in the small coffee shops, in the metro entrances where people disappear beneath the streets and return again with the rhythm of daily life. More than 1,000 years ago, this city was already looking outward, toward the river, toward trade, toward faith, toward the wider world. From these hills, rulers built churches, schools, libraries, and laws. Traders arrived from distant lands. Bells rang above the Dnipro, and Kyiv became more than a settlement. It became a center of memory. At St. Sophia Cathedral, the past still feels strangely present. Inside, ancient mosaics glow softly in the dim light. Faces made of stone and color look down from the walls, not with drama but with patience. There is a kind of silence in places like this that does not feel empty. It feels watchful, as if the building has seen too much to be surprised and survived too much to be easily moved. Not far away, the city turns downward. At Kyiv, golden towers rise above the ground, but the deeper story waits below it. Narrow candlelit passages run beneath the monastery, where pilgrims have walked for centuries through the cool darkness. Kyiv has always understood something important. Sometimes, to survive, a city must know how to go underground, and that idea did not disappear with the ancient caves. Today, beneath the modern streets, the metro runs deep below the surface. People descend on long escalators, leaving behind sunlight, traffic, and weather, entering another layer of the city. Students, workers, families, musicians, old women with shopping bags, young people with headphones and tired eyes. Life continues down there, not as a symbol, but as a routine. And maybe that is what makes Kyiv so powerful. It is not only ancient, it is not only beautiful, it is not only wounded, restored, rebuilt, and remembered. It is layered. Above ground, the city reaches for light. Below ground, it keeps moving. And between those two worlds, Kyiv teaches you something about Ukraine itself. What is rooted deeply enough does not vanish easily. It waits, it breathes, it rises again. But to understand Ukraine, you cannot stay only with cathedrals, rivers, and ancient stones. Sooner or later, you have to enter a market. And this is where the country becomes wonderfully human. A Ukrainian market is not simply a place to buy food. It is a place where tomatoes are judged with the seriousness of a national competition, where cucumbers are inspected like rare archaeological objects, where honey is not just honey, but a family argument waiting to happen. Ask one vendor which apples are best, and you may receive not only an answer but a small lecture on weather, soil, childhood, marriage, and why supermarket fruit cannot be trusted. And somehow, she will probably be right. Here, shopping is not rushed. People touch the produce. They smell the herbs. They ask where something came from, who grew it, when it was picked, and whether it will be good for soup, pickling, tea, or guests who are difficult to impress. There is humor in this. But there is also something deeper, because in Ukraine, food is rarely just food. It is memory you can hold in your hands, and the market is where that memory begins to speak out loud. In many modern cities, food arrives without a face. It appears on shelves wrapped in plastic, labeled by weight, priced by barcode, and separated from the hands that grew it. But in Ukraine, the local market, the Rynok, still keeps food close to people. Here, the morning begins in color. Red tomatoes stacked in uneven pyramids, green cucumbers shining under drops of water, bundles of dill, parsley, and mint tied together with string. Potatoes still carrying a little earth on their skin, jars of golden honey catching the light like small pieces of summer. The market is loud, but not chaotic. It has its own rhythm. Vendors call out prices. Shoppers answer with questions. Old friends pause in the narrow aisles. Someone laughs. Someone complains about the weather. Someone insists that this year's cherries are not as sweet as last year's. And everyone nearby seems to have an opinion. This is not only commerce, it is community. Many of the people selling here have grown the food themselves, or know exactly who did. A woman behind a table of herbs may have gathered them from her garden before sunrise. A man selling apples may tell you which village they came from before you have even asked. And if you look closely, the market begins to reveal a quiet philosophy. Nothing here is anonymous. A cabbage has a season. A jar of pickles has a recipe. A loaf of bread has a baker. A bunch of flowers has a reason to be bought. Life is measured not only by speed, but by attention, by knowing which vendor has the best cheese, which grandmother makes the strongest horseradish, which honey tastes of buckwheat, and which one carries the softness of wildflowers. In a world where so much has become distant, the Rynok remains close to the land, close to the season, close to the people. And from this market, the journey naturally moves into the warmest room in the country. In Ukraine, the kitchen is not just a room. It is one of the most important archives in the country. Not the kind with locked doors, silent shelves, and old documents sleeping under glass, but the kind with steam on the windows, flour on the table, a knife moving through cabbage, a grandmother tasting soup from a wooden spoon and deciding, without measuring anything, that it still needs something. Maybe salt, maybe garlic, maybe another 10 minutes, maybe simply the patience that no recipe can explain. Here, history is not always written down. Sometimes it is stirred. Sometimes it is kneaded into dough, folded into dumplings, kept warm under a cloth, carried from one generation to the next by hands that learned before. They could fully understand. And at the center of this memory is borscht. To call it a soup feels almost too small. Borscht is red with beetroot, deep with vegetables, sharpened by sourness, softened by cream, and changed slightly from home to home, village to village, family to family. One kitchen may make it sweeter, another may make it darker. One grandmother may insist on beans, another may look personally offended by the suggestion. This too is part of the culture, because borscht is not a fixed object, it is a living conversation. A recipe that says, this is how we make it here. This is how my mother made it. This is how our village remembers the taste of summer, winter, hunger, celebration, and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. Around the table, food becomes more than food. Bread is broken. Tea is poured. Stories return in small pieces. Someone remembers a wedding. Someone remembers a harvest. Someone remembers a person who is no longer there, but whose way of cutting vegetables is still quietly being copied. That is the power of a kitchen. It keeps people present after they are gone. And in Ukraine, where so much history has tried to move through people, like a storm, the kitchen has often remained a shelter, a place where language could survive softly, where songs could be hummed without performance, where children learned not only what to eat, but who they were. Outside, the world could change. Borders could move. Empires could rise and fall. Cities could be renamed, rebuilt, and renamed again. But inside the kitchen, a pot still simmered. And as long as someone remembered the taste, the story was not lost. Some cultures keep their memory in books. Ukraine keeps much of it in thread. The Vyshyvanka, the traditional embroidered shirt, may look at first like a beautiful garment. White linen, red and black patterns, flowers, diamonds, spirals, lines crossing and returning. But to see it only as clothing is to miss the point. A Vyshyvanka is a language without sound. Every region has its own patterns. Every color carries a feeling. Every stitch belongs to a longer story. Some designs speak of protection, some of fertility, some of family, harvest, love, grief, sunlight, and the earth beneath the feet. For centuries, these shirts were made slowly, often by hand, often by women whose names were never written into official history, but whose work carried history anyway. A mother could sew protection into the collar of a child's shirt. A bride could wear a pattern chosen not only for beauty, but for blessing. A family could recognize where someone came from by the embroidery resting on their shoulders. And that is what makes it powerful. The shirt does not shout identity, it wears it quietly. It says, "This is where I come from. This is who remembered me before I knew how to remember myself." And then there is the Pysanka, a single egg, small enough to hold in one hand, yet covered with symbols, older than many of the buildings around it. The Pysanka is made with wax and dye, layer by layer, color by color, until the shell becomes a tiny map of meaning. Suns, wheat, deer, birds, water, lines with no beginning and no end. At first it seems delicate, almost too fragile to carry anything serious. But that fragility is exactly why it matters. A Pysanka can break in a second, so can a memory, if one generation stops passing it on. That is why the making of it matters as much as the object itself. A child sits beside a grandmother. A hand learns how to hold the stylus. Wax touches the shell. A pattern appears slowly, not through explanation but through repetition. This is how culture survives when it is too intimate for monuments. Not in speeches, not in museums alone, but at a table under warm light, through the patient movement of hands. The Vyshyvanka and the Pysanka are not decorations. They are reminders that a country is not only defended by walls, armies, or borders. Sometimes it is defended by a thread, sometimes by an egg, sometimes by the quiet decision to teach a child the same pattern again. And then, Ukraine changes its voice. The wide fields begin to rise. The horizon folds into hills. The roads grow narrower. The air turns cooler. And slowly, the Carpathian Mountains appear. Here, the country no longer speaks in the language of endless plains. It whispers through pine forests, through morning fog, through wooden fences, mountain streams, and the distant sound of bells moving across a valley. The Carpathians feel like a different rhythm of Ukraine. Older, slower, more hidden. Villages rest between the slopes as if they were placed there carefully by hand. Smoke rises from chimneys in the cold morning. Haystacks stand in the fields like small golden towers. Horses move along muddy roads. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then decides the mountain is too peaceful to disturb. Life here is shaped by height, weather, and patience. Winter can arrive heavily. Spring can come late. Rain can change a path into a river before afternoon. But people here have learned to live with the mountain, not against it. They build with wood. They cook what the season gives. They know which slope catches the sun, which forest path leads to mushrooms, which stream is safe to cross after rain, and which clouds mean you should probably go home before the sky changes its mind. There is a quiet humor in mountain life too. In the Carpathians, asking a local whether a trail is difficult may not give you a simple answer. He may look at your shoes first, then at the sky, then back at your shoes, and after a long pause he may say, "For you," may be difficult. Not cruelly, just honestly. The mountain does not flatter anyone. That may be why it feels so real. Here, wooden churches rise among trees, their dark roofs and tall towers, blending into the forest as if they grew from the same earth. They do not dominate the landscape. They belong to it. Inside, the air feels still. Outside, the forest keeps breathing. And beyond the villages, ancient beech forests stretch across the slopes. Trees older than many borders, older than many names on maps, older than the arguments people make about land. The Carpathians remind you that Ukraine is not only a country of harvest and history, it is also a country of silence. A place where the soul of the land is not always found in great monuments, but in mist between trees, in the creak of a wooden gate, in a shepherd's call across a valley, and in the feeling that some places do not need to explain themselves. They simply remain, and the longer you stay in the mountains, the more you understand. Not every part of Ukraine asks to be seen. Some parts ask to be listened to. Just when you think you have begun to understand Ukraine, the country changes again. After the mountains, after the forests, after the deep black earth and the quiet villages, the land opens southward. The air becomes warmer. The light becomes sharper. The roads seem to stretch towards salt and wind. And then comes the sea. For many visitors, the Black Sea is an unexpected side of Ukraine. They arrive with images of wheat fields, golden churches, old cities, and mountain villages in their minds. But here the country faces outward, toward ports, toward ships, toward trade, summer, music, balconies, stairways and streets that smell faintly of stone, warmed by the sun. The south has always carried a different energy, less silent than the mountains, less solemn than the monasteries, more open, more restless, more likely to answer a serious question with a joke and somehow still make a serious point. But the strangest surprise may not be the sea. It may be the sand, because a country famous for black earth also hides a sea of sand. In the south of Ukraine, the landscape can shift into dunes and dry grass, into pale open spaces where the wind moves the surface like water. It feels almost impossible at first, as if a fragment of another continent had been quietly placed inside Eastern Europe and left there to confuse travelers. And that is part of Ukraine's power. It refuses to stay in one category. It is not only fertile fields, not only old churches, not only villages, not only forests, not only mountains, not only sorrow, not only survival. It is also coastline, heat, humor, dust, salt, cafes, markets, dunes, and cities that look at the sea as if the rest of the world might arrive at any moment. The journey began in the earth. It followed the river. It climbed into the mountains. And now, at the edge of the Black Sea, Ukraine becomes something else again. Brighter, louder, more playful. And nowhere carries that playful spirit quite like Odesa. Odesa is not a city that introduces itself quietly. It arrives with sunlight on old balconies, Music from open windows, smell of coffee drifting through courtyards, and the feeling that someone nearby is about to tell a story that may or may not be completely true. And in Odesa, that is part of the charm. This is a city built at the edge of the Black Sea, shaped by sailors, merchants, artists, travelers, and people who understood that a port is never only a place where ships arrive. It is a place where languages mix, where food changes, where jokes travel faster than news, where strangers can become characters in a story before they have even finished their coffee. Odesa has always had a different rhythm from the rest of Ukraine. It is elegant but not stiff, old but never sleepy, proud but rarely too serious about itself. Walk through its streets and you feel the layers. Grand stairways, opera houses, tree-lined boulevards, hidden courtyards where laundry moves in the sea breeze, and neighbors speak from balcony to balcony as if the whole building were one large family conversation. Here, humor is not decoration. It is a local language. In some places, people tell jokes to make life lighter. In Odesa, sometimes the joke is the point. A way of surviving, resisting, flirting, arguing, and reminding the world that tragedy should never be allowed to have the final word. Ask for directions, and you may receive a story. Ask a simple question, and you may get 3 answers, 2 opinions, and 1 warning about where not to buy fish. And somehow, by the end, you may still not know the shortest route, but you will know the city better. Because Odesa is not understood by efficiency. It is understood by atmosphere, by the sound of footsteps on warm stone, by laughter spilling from cafes, by the sea waiting at the end of the street, by the way the city seems to look outward, toward ships, storms, strangers, and possibility. After the silence of the mountains and the deep memory of the villages, Odesa reminds you of another truth about Ukraine. A country can carry pain and still laugh. A country can remember everything and still invite the morning in. And from this bright edge of the sea, the journey turns toward one of the quietest and most haunting places in the country. There are places in the world where silence feels empty, and then there are places where silence feels alive. Chornobyl is one of them. For many people, the name carries only one meaning: a disaster, a warning, a place frozen in fear, distance, and memory. And that meaning is real. It should not be softened. It should not be turned into spectacle. It should not be used as a cheap mystery for travelers looking for darkness. But Chornobyl is also more complicated than a single word, because after people left, something unexpected began to happen. The roads grew quiet, the buildings emptied, windows broke, paint peeled from classroom walls, trees pushed through pavement, grass covered the edges of streets, birds returned to rooftops, animals moved through spaces where human voices once filled the air. Slowly, the place became not only a symbol of human error, but also a strange and haunting lesson in what happens when the human world steps back. Nature did not ask permission. It entered the villages. It entered the playgrounds. It entered the fields, the courtyards, the train tracks, the walls, the roofs, and over time, silence began to grow leaves. This does not make the past less painful. It makes it more sobering, because Chornobyl does not offer easy beauty. It offers a different kind of seeing. A fox crossing an empty road, a tree rising through a broken floor, a forest standing where people once planned their ordinary lives, a room where time seems to have stopped. While outside, the seasons kept moving. There is no simple emotion here. Not wonder alone, not sadness alone, not fear alone. It is all of them at once. And perhaps that is why Chornobyl belongs in the story of Ukraine, but must be spoken of carefully, It reminds you that memory is not always warm, not always golden, not always embroidered, sung, or served at a kitchen table. Sometimes memory is quiet. Sometimes it is abandoned. Sometimes it is overgrown. Sometimes it waits in places people left behind because staying was no longer possible. But even here, Ukraine's deeper story remains. The story of land that changes, of life that returns, of silence that does not mean emptiness. And after Chornobyl, the question becomes larger than travel. What does a place become after the world thinks it has already understood it? And what does a country become when it has to keep living with memories too heavy to carry and too important to forget? But Ukraine is not a country living only in the past. That would be the easiest mistake to make. After the old churches, the embroidered shirts, the village markets, the mountain forests, and the silent places where memory feels almost too heavy, it might be tempting to imagine Ukraine as a land preserved in another century. But it is not. Ukraine is young too. It is students rushing through metro stations with phones in their hands. It is designers working from cafes in Lviv. It is musicians recording in small rooms above noisy streets. It is young families trying to build ordinary lives in extraordinary times. It is old apartment blocks becoming vertical villages and new glass buildings rising beside streets that still remember horses, bells, and empire. This is the paradox. Ukraine holds the past tightly, but it does not want to be trapped by it. People leave villages for cities. People leave cities for other countries. Some return, some do not. Some carry the language with them. Some carry recipes. Some carry songs, jokes, photographs, a shirt folded in a suitcase, or the memory of a garden behind a house they may not see again for years. Modern life pulls people forward, memory pulls them back, and somewhere between those two forces, Ukraine keeps becoming itself. You can feel it in Kyiv, where ancient monasteries and underground trains belong to the same city. You can feel it in Lviv, where coffee, old stone, young artists, and centuries of trade seem to sit at the same table. You can feel it in Odesa, where laughter moves through streets that have seen far more than laughter. You can feel it in villages, where a grandmother may use a smartphone with one hand and knead dough with the other, proving that tradition does not always resist modern life. Sometimes it simply learns how to text. And maybe that is the real Ukraine. Not a museum, not a headline, not a single tragedy, not a postcard, but a living country, one that leaves, returns, adapts, remembers, and begins again. Again and again. And in the end, Ukraine does not leave you with only one image. Not only a field of wheat moving under the wind, not only a golden dome catching the morning light, not only a river bending through green hills, not only a market filled with tomatoes, honey, dill, and voices, not only a wooden church standing quietly in the mountains, not only a city by the sea that answers pain with laughter, not only a silent forest growing through the edges of an abandoned road. Ukraine leaves you with layers: earth, water, stone, wood, thread, song, bread, memory. It is a country that cannot be reduced to one chapter, one crisis, one map, one headline, or one photograph, because the deeper you look, the more it changes. The land becomes a kitchen, the kitchen becomes a language. The language becomes a song, the song becomes a memory. And the memory becomes a way of staying alive. That is what this journey reveals. Ukraine is not beautiful because it is untouched. It is beautiful because it has been touched by history again and again, and still finds ways to remain human in the quiet of its villages, in the pride of its cities, in the humor of its ports, in the patience of its mountains, in the colors of its embroidery, in the hands that still teach children how to draw old symbols on a fragile egg. Perhaps this is what the world often misses. A country is not only what happens to it, a country is also what it chooses to keep. And Ukraine has kept more than most people know. It has kept its soil, its songs, its recipes, its rivers, its jokes, its prayers, its patterns, its names. It has kept the small things that make a place impossible to erase. So when the headlines fade and the noise becomes quiet, and the journey comes to an end, one question remains. What does a land need to survive? Maybe not only strength, maybe memory. And here, in the heart of Eastern Europe, Ukraine still remembers. If one place in Ukraine stayed with you the most, the river. Mountains, the market, the sea, or the silent forest, share it below. Because every journey begins with a place, but the best journeys end with a feeling.